Hello and welcome. My name is Marina Cantarutti. I'm a multimodal and interactional linguist. In other words, it means I study phonetics and gesture in everyday conversation, in everyday interaction. And what I'm going to be doing today is just giving you a sort of like a taster, mini lecture on phonetics and phonology, of the kinds of things you can expect in a sort of phonetics and phonology module in the MA in linguistics. So just to get started, I'm going to show you a picture you may have seen before. This is a simplistic form of what we call the speech chain, which is basically a representation of everything that is pretty much going on now as I'm talking to you. So there's a lot going on between my brain and my nervous impulses and my organs of speech. And everything I'm saying is being transmitted through the air in my living room, across the universe, all the way back to your own living rooms and bedrooms and into your ears. And this is pretty much what a representation of some of the things that phonetics is interested in. The scientific study of the sounds of speech, how we produce the sounds, articulatory phonetics, how we transmit the sounds, acoustic phonetics, how we perceive the sounds, auditory phonetics. You may also have seen these two images before in some form or other. To the left, you have the International Phonetic Alphabet, which is a very, very complex set of symbols that shows different configurations that make possible different kinds of sounds that we will eventually find in different natural languages, and conlangs as well, to be entirely honest. And then we have the vocal tract. This is a representation of the vocal tract that you may have seen before, and perhaps the most interesting bits of the vocal tract happen around here, with the everything that we've got in the roof of the mouth, which is the receiver of a lot of interesting articulatory movement from my favorite muscle, which is the tongue. So if we put our tongues in action and we touch the back of our teeth, and we can try that now. If we start taking the tongue a little bit backwards, we will find the alveolar ridge, which is like the balcony of the mouth. And then if we continue going back, we will find a little bit of a hard, bony structure, a dome kind of thing, and that's your hard palate. And some of you may even be able to move your tongues even a little bit backwards, and you might be able to notice a change in the texture, right? And that change represents the beginning of a soft palate. And when you open your mouth and you look at yourself in the mirror, you will be able to see actually your uvula. And there are many different interesting parts of the tongue doing the work in articulation. So the IPA, International Phonetic Alphabet, is actually divided in different areas. So in an introductory PhonPhon course, you would actually study all these different configurations. But today we're going to do a little bit of a short stop, studying one particular set of sounds, some particular set of consonants. And basically we have systematic ways of describing sounds. And if we capture consonants, there are 4 important questions we generally answer. And today we're going to cover 3 of those. What are the vocal folds doing? The vocal folds are around this area. We're going to have an experiment in a couple of minutes. How the air happens to move through the vocal tract. So sometimes the air comes out, sometimes the air comes in, sometimes the air comes out through the mouth or through the nose. And then how these organs interact with each other, that's manner of articulation, and which organs interact with which place of articulation. So if we start discussing what the vocal folds are doing, so here we are going to try and identify the place where our glottis is, where larynx is. So we look for the larynx, and we can actually feel it. There's a bump here in our neck. Yeah, it will be more protuberant for some of you than others. So you're going to actually touch it, and you're going to produce the sound S. Now you're going to produce the sound Z. You should be able to feel a difference. Yeah, so if we alternate the sounds like this, You can try the same by covering your ears. Yeah, the noise you hear over the z sound will probably be very noticeable. So if we look at the larynx from above, this is a cartilage that you can see around here. Yeah, so this is the view from above. And then here we've got the ligaments. Yeah. And basically there are different positions that you may see the glottis adopting. So the vocal folds can be abducted and you can see an opening, yeah, and the vocal folds may be close together and they may vibrate, yeah, and those were the differences that we saw between our sa and our za sounds. So for the case of sa, the vocal folds were apart. For the case of za, the vocal folds were held together, yeah. And another configuration among many others that will create changes. It's got to do with vocal folds slightly shut when we have a glottal stop, like when you say pia, yeah, or better, right? The glottal stop there in the middle, that's what you're going to get. Now, you may have seen the glottis before, maybe you haven't. Yeah, if you're squeamish, if you don't like looking at body parts, then please look away for the next minute or two. There we go. Let's watch it.
Visualize the vocal cord vibration. Note that as the pitch elevates, the true vocal cords become longer and thinner. When the vocal cords are...
So over there you saw actually the vocal folds in their two positions that we described for sa and za. Right. So this is a capture of the International Phonetic Alphabet, right? And basically what does this chart represent? Well, it represents these dimensions that we discussed in the questions. Voiceless sounds on the left, voiced sounds on the right. The place of articulation is the horizontal, yeah, distribution. So basically all the way from bilabial on the lips, all the way down to glottal, yeah, actually down the glottis, yeah. So it's a sort of like the chart sort of like follows the whole journey from your lips all the way down to the glottis. And something similar happens to manner of articulation, yeah? So the sounds on top are plosives, or sounds that are produced with the organs tightly close together at some point, whereas the sound at the very bottom happen to be approximant sounds, and those sounds tend to be produced with some degree of opening, yeah? Of a separation, yeah? So in very simplistic terms, this follows like the opening of the mouth, so to speak. And then phonologists are going to be deciding which sounds out of all the possibilities are actually sounds that are important and used meaningfully in different languages. So that's why, for example, you may end up with a simplified version of that for the sounds of consonant sounds of Southern British English. So in the next few minutes, I'm going to be talking about one set of sounds in English, yeah, and which they will be very easy to identify. And in actually to show you that, I'm going to be showing you a clip from Friends, from the series Friends, where one of the interesting features about these sounds, they're going to be making fun of one of those features, yeah, in this particular sketch.
We have to find the rest of the platoon.
Forget the platoon. The platoon is gone.
What?
The platoon is dead. Face facts, Tony.
So what are we gonna do? We have no reinforcements, no food.
No, we still have food. In the basement, I saw potatoes and some dried pasture.
Okay, so the sounds you may have noticed are the sounds called plosives, yeah. And if we look at the plosives in English down here, yeah. Any observations as to the voicing of plosives? Anything interesting about what you can see here in terms of voicing of plosives? Oh, they come in pairs, exactly. So people who do phonology, they study different sound systems, and one of the things they like to study is how sound systems may or may not be symmetrical, yeah? And we have a sort of like apparent symmetry here in terms of voicing in English plosives, yeah? So let's talk a little bit about the place of articulation for plosives then. That's quite simple thing to answer for English, yeah? Notice that, again, what do we notice about the place of articulation for English plosives? Again, they seem to be quite symmetrical, quite neat, somewhere at the beginning of the mouth and at the back of the mouth, and somewhere around the front area of the mouth for the alveolar sounds, right? So distributed here, here, and there. So that's quite easy to describe. In the case of English, we have bilabial sounds, ba and pa, alveolar sounds, ta and da, and velar sounds, ka and ga. But so that's for English is quite easy. So let's complicate matters a little bit. Let's talk a little bit about consonants. Let's try consonants in other positions. Yeah. So what I will invite you to do is I'm just going to give you instructions. You don't need to turn on your mics. You can just try them at home. But basically, we're going to be trying the whole row here of plosives. And as we will see later, plosives are explosive sounds. So we will need to have some sort of contact at the beginning, and then we're going to let the sound out quite abruptly. Yeah. So this is pa, this is ba. We are fine with those. Depending on your first language, you may have alveolar, ta, da. In my first language, they are dental, ta, da. Yeah. And now if we do some yoga with the tongue, if we curl the tongue a little bit back and we contact the end of the balcony of the mouth, the back part of the alveolar ridge, then we can get some retroflex sounds. Ta and da. Yeah, ta, da. If we try that contact now, no longer with a yoga tongue, with a regular tongue, right, just normal tip or the blade of the tongue against the dome structure of the top of your mouth, that will lead us to ka and ga. Yeah. Then we have ka and ga. And now the interesting thing is trying to go a little bit further back in the mouth. So if we go from k a bit further into the uvula, k, yeah, that you might need to open your mouth a little bit more and maybe even draw your lower jaw a little bit forward. The same with ga into k, ka, ga, ka, yeah. And finally, the glottal stop, yeah, as in better. Right. So if we focus on manner of articulation, if we focus on how the sounds are produced, we can represent plosives in a sort of like schematic way, like the one you have here, right? So what we have here is the production of two plosives, pa and ba. Okay. Both surrounded by vowels. Yeah, so here's the vowel, here's the vowel, here's the pa, here's the ba. And basically what we have here is a representation of the organs of speech getting really, really firmly close together at the end of a vowel, then a period of hold, and then a period of release. Yeah, so those are the three stages of a plosive: closure, hold, and release. So closure, complete obstruction to the airflow. Then we have a hold, build-up of pressure behind the closure, and finally the release, the abrupt separation of the articulators. Now, there are some interesting things about each of these elements in English and beyond English. So, for example, the hold face is interesting because different languages can actually use the hold face to make distinctions between different sounds and different words, essentially. In English, for example, if we hold a plosive for longer, we might normally be doing that for intensifying purposes, right? So, for example, at the moment I'm studying the interjection, oh my God, and you hear lots of people saying, oh my God, yeah? So, for example, that will be a case where you would be using these lengthened diacritics to show that the ga sound is longer in its hold phase, yeah? But it's interesting that in languages like Hungarian, for example, using a sound k, or actually keeping the hold phase longer, k, can actually mark a difference between words. Yeah. So inhabitant here versus the word that could be in English could be treated as having a lacquered finish. So here we go. I'll play each one twice.
Lakos.
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 And compare that one with the following one.
Lakos.
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 Right. So the whole face of plosives is interesting because of that. But in English, for example, the release face of plosives has been very widely studied because in English, for example, generally there is a distinction between contexts where sounds will be released and then the vowel will start sounding, the vowel will be voiced will be the voicing of a vowel will be heard immediately afterwards, and in other cases that will not be heard. So basically what I'm talking about here is we're looking at the release of a plosive, yeah, and how early we can hear the vibration and see the vibration of a vocal voicing the following vowel. Yeah, we generally measure this distance between the release and the beginning of a voicing of vowel. We call that the voice onset time, or VOT, and it's a very popular measure in phonetics. So basically, it's generally the case that when we have a voiceless plosive, we're very likely to find quite some distance between the release of a plosive and the beginning of voicing. So here's our vowel. We can recognize it as a vowel because in the waveform, which is the upper part of this graph, the air pressure, it's a representation of the air pressure, and in some ways the fluctuations of the air particles in the air, and basically you see this as a very sort of like regular kind of pattern. And then you can also see these dark bands here, we call them formants. Well, these are representative of a vowel. So this is where the vowel begins, and remember there are 3 stages for the plosives. So here we have the closure, here we have the hold phase. The beginning there's a little bit of voicing, but then and then this messy bit here is the release, and then we have some distance after the release. There is a lot of noise happening before the actual vowel. Yeah, so normally we measure that in milliseconds, and that's our VOT. Yeah, and I'll just play it for you to hear.
Pin.
Okay,
Pin.
that's the word pin. If we compare that with the bus sound, then if we hear the
Bin.
okay, that's the word bin, then we can see that that distance is a lot smaller.
Bin.
Yeah,
Bin.
very, very small. Notice that we also have some leftover voicing, yeah, for part of a closure of a hold period, yeah, but then the voicing dies out, yeah. So it's not true that the ba is necessarily fully voiced, as we can see here. But then the interesting thing is what happens when we have a context when we have a pa after sa. And this is a very well-known phenomenon that people like to talk about, phoneticians like to talk about a lot for English. So basically we have the word
Spin.
Spin.
but if we measure the distance between the release and the beginning of the vowel, that's
Spin.
very, very small.
Spin.
Pretty much
Spin.
like another, not
Spin.
the pa sound that we saw before, but like the sound ba. And if we actually play this word
Spin.
without the
Spin.
sa, this is what you get.
Spin.
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 Okay,
Spin.
so we can see then that the distinction, the very neat symmetry that we saw earlier, can be a little bit problematic for English. We may have features, instances where spas and bars are more similar to each other than we might first think.
Spin. Spin.
Right, so that will be all. Thank you very much, and I'm looking forward to hearing any questions.